first step, which you'll be really familiar with by now, is to score in the feather lines. Use the scoring hold and score down each line with one continuous movement. Repeat this 2 or 3 times for each feather. Next, we're going to start carving in the first 4 feathers. But we're just going to start with the bottom half. In other words, where the feathers curve off towards the tips. Use the thumb hold and carve towards the line at a 90-degree angle. For this first feather, that means you're actually carving straight across the grain. But the direction of the grain will gradually shift as you move around the feather. Carve into the first 3 lines in this way. After a little while, you will need to start alternating between steps 1 and 2. Rescore the lines with your knife, and then continue carving with your gouge. You will need to repeat these steps several times. We're going to continue with carving the first 4 feathers, but this time we're going to carve the top half of the feathers. Instead of carving perpendicular to the feather lines, we're going to carve along the feather lines. You might want to secure your wing in place to do this step. Use the index hold and carve along the feather lines towards the feather tips. This time you're actually carving with the grain or at a slight angle to it. After a little while, you will need to rescore the lines and then alternate between carving and scoring. Next, we're going to carve feathers 5 and 6. Again, we're going to start by just doing the bottom half of the feathers. Here, I am actually carving without a clamp, and I'm using the thumb hold. But you can use a clamp if you'd prefer. If you use a clamp, you might find the index hold better. Just like before, carve towards the lines at a 90-degree angle. By this point, you're actually carving diagonally across the grain. Once again, you will need to rescore the lines and continue to alternate between carving and scoring. Now let's carve the top half of feathers 5 and 6. Again, I am carving without a clamp, and I'm using the thumb hold. Carve along the lines towards the feather tips. Yet again, alternate between scoring and carving. If you feel like it, you can do a bit of cleaning up. Here I'm using the index hold, but with the gouge on its side, to clean up the ridges. We used this technique in the last video. Finally, let's carve in feather 7. This time I've sped up the video because you're probably getting the idea by now. Also, you can carve these 2 lines in one go using the same technique. Carve at a 90-degree angle to the line. By this point, you're actually carving with the grain. Yet again, alternate between scoring and carving. As an added touch, carve across the grain to blend the carving into the rest of the wing. You can also do a bit more cleaning up with the edge of your gouge. We've now finished carving the underside feathers. Now we need to carve in the feather tips. For the goldfinch, It really helps to draw those feather shapes in, as they're all slightly different shapes. You can use your reference sheet to help you. I've broken down this stage in the process into 5 techniques. They are all whittling techniques, but you don't have to do them in a strict order. In other words, I'm going to give you the ingredients, and then you can play around for yourself. I'm not going to show you loads and loads of footage because it will take too long. Technique 1. Scoring in the sides. This one's a quick one and really, really easy. Score in the side markings with your knife. Technique 2. Turn and flick. Use this technique for the first few feathers. That's feathers 1 to 3 or 4. Carve into the feather tips using a turn and flick action with your knife tip. Technique 3. Slicing down, then across. Use this technique for the underside. You can use it for all of the feathers. Slice with a downwards force, and then slice across. Down, then across. Technique 4. Slicing with the grain. You will need to use this technique for the bottom feathers. That's feathers 4, 5, 6, 7. Instead of the turn and flick action, slice in from the opposite direction, working with the grain. Technique 5. Curving off the tips. This one makes quite a subtle difference, but it's worth doing. You don't want the very tips of the feathers to be too pointy, so you can just curve off the very tips to make them a bit more finessed. Use a very gentle turn and flick action, but this time you're going in the opposite direction. This works for the top feathers. for the bottom feathers, you can just slice off the corners. You can mix up all of these techniques I've just shown you at your own pace. This is what you're aiming for. Of course, once you've carved the left wing, you will need to carve the right wing as a mirror image.